War paint and wig disguises, preparing for the Crowfeet invasion. I have never been able to watch Granny's war preparations without feeling a surge of pure unrestrained delight. There is something magnificent in the totality of her commitment. Once the alarm has been raised and the threat of the Crowfeet has taken shape in her mind, Irene Ryan commits every particle of her being to the defense of the household. The mansion becomes a fortress. The family becomes a militia. And the ordinary objects of domestic life are conscripted into the service of a frontier that exists by this point almost entirely inside her head. I love her for the completeness of the transformation. I love the show for refusing to dilute it with winks or apologies. The distribution of the wigs remains for me one of the single funniest and most strangely tender inventions in the entire series. Granny has prepared for the possibility of scalping with the practical ingenuity of a woman who has spent a lifetime turning limited resources into solutions. If the engines are coming for hair, then the family will give them hair that does not belong to anyone. The wigs are produced, assignments are made. And then comes the masterstroke, the albino wig, reserved for special deployment because, as Granny explains with absolute conviction, Indians are superstitious about albinos. Every time I reach that line I laugh the same deep helpless laugh. It is not the laughter of superiority, it is the laughter of recognition. This is Granny at her purest, taking a fragment of half-remembered lore, combining it with the materials at hand and constructing a complete defensive system out of the mixture. The fact that the system is unnecessary only makes the care with which she builds it more moving. Jed's resistance to the full military footing provides the necessary counterweight. Buddy Ebsen plays the role of the reluctant commander with the quiet authority of a man who has never needed a war to prove his courage. He does not believe the Crowfeet are coming to scalp anyone. He has spoken with Brewster. He understands that the matter is a boundary dispute and that the visitors are coming to talk. His repeated attempts to dial down the temperature, "we ain't gonna fight, we're gonna talk," are met with the full force of Granny's scorn. In her cosmology, talking is what people do right before they get their heads peeled like onions. She has seen the John Wayne movies. She knows how these stories end. The collision between Jed's preference for negotiation and Granny's preference for armed readiness is one of the oldest dynamics in the household, and the show stages it here with undiminished energy. I have always admired Ebsen for never playing Jed's patience as weakness. His calm is a different form of strength, and the series allows both forms to coexist without forcing a victor. The children's participation in the preparations adds another layer of comic and emotional richness. Jethro, never one to miss a chance at dramatic self-importance, throws himself into the defense with the enthusiasm of a boy who has been waiting his whole life for a proper siege. Ellie Mae, more practical and less theatrical, simply follows the orders that make sense to her and quietly questions the ones that do not. Donna Douglas gives Ellie a grounded skepticism that keeps the escalating absurdity from floating away entirely. When the two of them are pressed into service as lookouts or ammunition carriers, the screen fills with the particular energy of young people who are half playing and half believing. That mixture feels true to every childhood game that ever tipped over into something more serious than the players originally intended. Meanwhile, across town, Mr. Drysdale is conducting his own version of the war effort, and the parallel is delicious. While Granny is loading rifles and assigning wigs, Drysdale is trying to manage the actual arrival of Chief Running Wolf and Little Fox. His attempts to control the narrative, insisting that the meeting take place on his territory, trying to bribe the visitors with beads and novelty items, performing a grotesque parody of native speech patterns, are among the most cringe-inducing and revealing moments Raymond Bailey ever played. The banker, who has spent years cultivating an image of civilized sophistication, is reduced to offering Freddie Wampum and Tick Tick for Brave in a desperate attempt to make the oil problem go away. The scene is uncomfortable in exactly the way it needs to be. It exposes the emptiness of Drysdale's cultural confidence the moment real stakes appear. I cannot watch it without wincing, and I cannot dismiss the wince as unintended. The show knows what it is doing. The arrival of the real Crowfeet at the mansion produces the sequence's finest collision of expectations. Granny is prepared for war ponies and flaming arrows. What she receives are two well-dressed, highly educated men who regard the fortified household with polite bewilderment. The chief's Oxford background and the son's Harvard doctorate are not merely topical jokes about the changing status of Native Americans in the 1960s. They are structural reversals that invert every assumption the Clampett defense has been built upon. The savages are the cosmopolitans. The defenders are the ones operating from the older, bloodier script. The moment the chief opens his mouth and speaks in the measured tones of a man who has read more books than anyone else in the room, the entire war footing becomes visible as the magnificent anachronism it has always been. And yet the show does not simply puncture Granny's preparations and move on. It allows the emotional reality of those preparations to retain their dignity even as their practical necessity evaporates. When she finally understands that the visitors have not come to take scalps, the adjustment is not instantaneous. Ryan plays the residual readiness with a stubbornness that feels completely earned. A lifetime of stories does not dissolve because two men in suits have arrived with a surveyor's claim. The body that has been tensed for combat takes time to stand down. In that lag between understanding and relaxation, I find one of the most human notes in the entire episode. Granny is ridiculous. She is also real. The staged elements of the raid, the studio extras, the carefully blank ammunition, the theatrical deaths on the cement pond push the comedy into openly self-aware territory. The series has always known that it exists inside the same myth-making machinery that produced the John Wayne movies Granny treats as documentary evidence. By the time the fake attack is underway and Drysdale is clutching a staged wound to the heart, the show has folded its own artificiality into the joke. The boundary between the Clampett's private theater of frontier defense and Hollywood's public theater of the same fantasy collapses entirely. I have always loved the series for its willingness to let that collapse happen without losing affection for either side of the boundary. As the preparations reach their chaotic peak and then begin to subside under the pressure of reality, I feel the familiar gratitude that these episodes so often leave me with. Granny was ready, the family was ready. The wigs were assigned and the rifles were loaded, and the albino disguise was held in reserve for the critical moment. The fact that none of it was needed does not in the end make the readiness foolish. It makes it generous. They were prepared to protect one another against an enemy that did not arrive in the expected form. In a different kind of story, that preparation would be rewarded with a battle. In this story it is rewarded with the quieter, harder revelation that the battle was always elsewhere, in the surveyor's maps, in the oil leases, in the long American argument about who the land belongs to and what the belonging costs. I watch the stand down now with the same mixture of laughter and respect I have felt for years. The wigs are put away. The rifles are unloaded. The cement pond is cleared of its theatrical corpses. And somewhere in the mansion, an old woman who was prepared to hold the frontier with her own hands adjusts reluctantly to the news that the frontier has moved again. The invasion did not come. The defense will not be tested. And still the readiness itself remains in my mind, one of the purest expressions of love the series ever staged. They were ready to be ridiculous for one another. In the end, that may be the only preparation that ever really mattered.